Machine here, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel. 20-minute video for 2 minutes worth of content. Gold.
In late 2017, when the first ever Blast Pro Series event took place in Copenhagen, the one where Astralis played without Device, instead they had Dennis from NIP as a stand-in. At the time, would have been from Fnatic, I assume. And famously, they were one round from winning the event, but Fallen went God mode on Cash. MIBR managed to win it. At the time, obviously, they were SK Gaming. After that event, a lot of questions were not just asked about Refresh and the Blast Pro Series in terms of as a tournament organizer, because obviously they had the train wreck scenario where day one just never took place. Then they had a bunch of tech problems on day two. But also people looked at the format with the simultaneous games, with just best of ones, with just round robin, and they questioned, is this a good format? Like, surely this is flawed compared to some of the other tournaments out there. Now, admittedly, at that time, we didn't have the new IEM ESL format that we have now. A whole bunch of tournaments hadn't really leveled up to the same degree that you can say they have now. But I made a video about the topic at the time where I tried to explain some of the things I'll reiterate very quickly here. If you actually know some of the business considerations and the business model that Refresh are running with Blast Pro Series, it does make a lot more sense why they chose that format. They obviously were trying to do some gimmicks, things that had never been done before to get attention for the event. They were making the event much more about having just a few teams that were big name teams and about the spectacle of being in a stadium, not so much about, you know, the most hardcore competitive integrity of the best possible format to determine the best possible team. Hence why they don't have a semi-final or a third place game. Instead, what do they have? Well, they have a match where it's a standoff, where you have these weird show match components where it's Deagle versus Deagle and opposite stuff that no one really gives a shit about competitively, but that a casual fan might get into. So being as that may, let's talk now, after seeing a whole bunch of Blast Pro Series, about this particular format. Because if we look at this initially without the business considerations, just as someone who's a fan, watched a lot of big tournaments, watched a lot of international tournaments, wants to know what events to value very highly the results from and the placings from, in contrast to others where we count top fours at events and finals and how many events have you won and is this title as big as certain other titles. When you have all those considerations, you look at the Blast Pro Series format, and from top to bottom, there are a lot of flaws. In fact, I would say in many regards, it's one of the worst formats I've ever seen. Again, ignoring the business considerations, which I will address at the end. So let's start with how they determine the 6 teams. So it's invite only. There's no qualification to get to this tournament. So if ENCE hadn't have had that amazing run to the final of the major and then gotten invited, ENCE could not have been at this event. Hence, in the past, you've had teams like Team Liquid couldn't attend this event because the team that actually from NA Blast/Refresh had a deal with was Cloud9. When Cloud9 had won the major, it wasn't Team Liquid. And so as a result, yes, you tend to get good teams, usually very good teams, because luckily Astralis is always there, who's obviously owned by Refresh. You have the other teams they've done deals with over the years, FaZe, NIP, formerly Cloud9. Now they've got Team Liquid. They've had Na'Vi at a bunch of the events, even though they weren't at this one. So generally, it's always going to be good teams. That makes up for it being invite only. I mean, the only event that wasn't really that good in terms of the field was Istanbul, where Na'Vi, FaZe, and Team Liquid were all over at ESL New York at the same time. Okay, fair enough. I would say generally they're catching up to where they need to be as well. Like, I think at this point in time, for the fan base, you want NIP, so for business considerations. In terms of top teams, you probably shouldn't be inviting NIP anymore. Like, at this point in time, I think there's a number of teams would deserve that invite more. Mouse Sports seem like a fairly obvious one over history. There's a bunch of teams out there. Then you go and you look, okay, Cloud9 eventually, they got bumped out. Now Team Liquid's in. That's all good. I will say, I'm always going to have to bring this up. Just as when SK and Virtus Pro were playing at Epicenter, an event owned by ES Force, and those were teams owned by ES Force, at the same time as they were at the event, that is a conflict of interest. I can't necessarily trust that tournament organizer can act in an unbiased manner if he has to make a decision in the tournament between a team that the parent company owns and a team that the parent company doesn't. Likewise, in this kind of a scenario, is it fair that they could make an admin decision on MIBR, who has no relation to Refresh Entertainment, or Astralis, who is owned by Refresh Entertainment, who also are the people who own and operate the Blast Pro Series? Okay, that's a side point, but it's always going to be something you have to mention as a flaw in the way that the tournament's set up. It's not an independent tournament organizer like ESL, like DreamHack, etc. Then you've got to look at the format in terms of round robin for the initial games and then the final. Round robin will always be an incredibly flawed format. I think one of the worst. In fact, I would go ahead and say the worst of all the ones I've ever seen. It will feature games that do not matter, a team that cannot possibly make, in this case, the final, in other tournaments, the playoffs, but they still have to play. It has teams that have already made the playoffs and still have to play a game sometimes. So you have meaningless games, but they might not be meaningless for the other team in the game. Like another team playing a bottom-ranked team might desperately need that win in order to get into the playoffs. Well, now that that team doesn't have anything to play for, either because they've won or they've already lost, maybe they don't try as hard. And so as a result, the same opponent that now isn't trying and gives up a win easily, well, in the first game, they will probably go on gangbusters, right? They still thought they could win the tournament, thought they could make the playoffs. So that means if you were a team who's a peer of this other squad who's in contention for the playoffs, but you played the third team we're talking about, who's bottom already or top by a far margin, you potentially have an easier game later. The other guy had a harder game at the beginning. That's unfair. The games are treated by the format as though they're identical, but inherently the context means they almost never can be identical. Likewise, there is the potential to throw in the last game. So for example, if you were the team like Astralis who's won every game, if it so happened that the team you were playing in the last game could get into the final and be your opponent by winning that game, and you consider them an easier opponent, so for example, Ents versus a Team Liquid, that wasn't what happened this time around, but it could have, then if Astralis, all they have to do is just not be quite as good, just lose 16-14, lose 16-13, lose a pist around here or there, then the other team wins, you get to play an easier opponent in the final, you get to win the final more easily, you don't have to play a team like Team Liquid who actually has an edge on you in terms of the more skilled player for player, so they've already beat you in the past. They have a decent matchup against you. Ents has none of those factors. Now, that didn't happen, but you can see how this format openly allows it to happen. Likewise, what if in that scenario, the two of the teams playing the last game of the best of one group round robin were two teams that are either from the same country, and therefore maybe they want to agree to have a tie so that they play each other in the final, or maybe it's a scenario where one of them can't make it through, but they're from the same country or they're close friends as players, and now one of them chooses to lose a match to help their mates, their countrymen through, as opposed to a different squad who has no relation to any of them, would be the team that had made it through if this team had tried properly and gone for the gangbusters win and actually been able to get it. These are all flaws. These are all loopholes which can and will be exploited. And the fact that they can be means you've got to close them. You've got to think of that, but you can't in round robin. That is a flaw of the round robin format, I'm afraid. That's why I much prefer GSL system. You're always in the tournament if you're playing there. I much prefer Swiss system. You're always in the tournament if you're playing there. There's many, many different approaches you can take overall that I would consider superior to this entirely. Then you've got to ask about that aspect where it's the simultaneous games. 3 games going on at once. Good for the schedule, allows you to do a much, much shorter time frame event, which saves you money on the venue, which means that people only have to attend for one day, which means that people can pick between the games. That can be a positive. If I don't give a fuck about NiP versus Ents, but I want to watch Team Liquid versus Astralis, then I can watch that. I don't have to wait through one of those games or tune out when one of those games is over. Okay, that can be good in its own sense. It's not that good for the overall experience of viewing the whole event, though. Like, if you're someone like me who generally cares about all the teams at the Blast Pro Series and wants to watch all the games and will inevitably, well, I have to logistically go back and watch a bunch of the games as VODs, because I can't focus on 3 games at once. And in fact, it means if I was at the event, I'd be a lot less confident in my analysis, because I'd have to admit I can't have watched all these games at once. So I'm already telling you about a third of the games that I watched. And most events, I get to see all the games. I have a very good sense for where teams were, the form they were in, what's happened. Now, sure, that's not as much the case now as it was before, because already analysts and casters get games off, and a number of the people who are in that position don't choose to watch the games. They're already overworked, they have a very long work day, and they want to take some time off. Fair enough. But generally, the analysts do try to watch most of the games and have that in mind. So, I also feel like if you're a fan, you haven't got 100% of a grasp on the storylines. What if you didn't watch one of the teams that made the final? What if, shockingly, NiP had made the final? You're watching all the other teams except NiP generally, and you don't really have a sense for where they're at. It doesn't make the storyline as good, right? Then add in what happened here. So, in one of the last games, we end up having a tie between Team Liquid and Ents to see who made the final, and it went down to round difference. Now, why did that happen? Because there's no overtime option. Because since it's round robin, you can't play an overtime, because in that scenario, What about elsewhere? If we'd had overtime in the other games beforehand, then the round difference would be completely thrown off. So they don't have that as an option here due to round robin. Now, obviously, that's mega anticlimactic. Like, at the end of that Team Liquid Ends game, I wanted to see the fucking winner. Who's going to actually take this game? Especially in a world in which somehow that could have decided the finalists. Like, maybe you have a tiebreaker between the two teams to decide who then goes to the final. I'm talking about you play a tiebreaker, not just have a tiebreaker, which is round difference. Generally, I hate tiebreakers that aren't decided by a match of Counter-Strike. I hate things like round difference, fastest to win, head-to-head, etc. because they all have flaws to them. I'll probably do a video separately on I think what the flaws are in that respect. The problem is, again, Blast Pro Series doesn't want to add more tournament matches. They've already tried to make the format as concise as possible. They don't want to play an extra game, so they're not going to, quite frankly. Then there's the angle of using a round difference tiebreaker. So this happened between ENCE and Team Liquid, and Team Liquid clearly had the much better tiebreaker in terms of the round difference because they won one of their games 16-2. Let me have a look who that was against. That was against MIBR and DOS2, and they won 16-3 against NiP on Overpass. Now, ENCE, on the other hand, two of ENCE's games took place on Nuke, and both times they had to start on the T side. Now, even though in one of those games, in fact, both games, they won the T side, and one of them, they even got 12 rounds on the T side, which is implausible. But even so, with such godlike first halves on a CT-sided map, they were only able to get results that were a 16-9 against FaZe on Nuke and a 16-7 against NiP on Nuke. Now, good luck trying to get a 16-3 or a 16-2 starting T-side on Nuke. Like, very rare that has ever happened. I doubt even Astralis has done that. Maybe more than once. I don't even know if they've done it more than once, quite frankly. So that just shows the flaw with the round difference approach, doesn't it? Not only are you're playing the same opponents, but not on the same maps. So as a result, the map that you start on is going to have a massive impact on whether or not you have a chance to get a high differential between your rounds won and the opponent's one, and therefore have the better round difference. So as a result, a team like Team Liquid, who have been playing Dust 2 a whole bunch, well, what do you know? They played one of their games on Dust 2 against MIBR and got a 16-2. Well, Dust 2 is a map where on both sides you can snowball the fuck out of it. And as a result, it's going to be a lot easier to get a 16-2 than it is to play on Nuke, especially if you're starting T-side. Maybe if you're starting CT-side, it's possible. So as a result, certain maps become overpowered. Well, that's not a good system because we don't want people to be good on maps based on trying to win out on round difference. We want them to just be good on maps because those are the maps in the pool that fit their strengths. And so traditional maps like Inferno, like Mirage, these are nightmare maps to try and get a big round differential. Dust 2, Nuke if you start CT side, those are maps you can get monster halves on that you can win 16-3, 16-4. So round difference already is an inherently unfair tiebreaker as it is. It's not similar scenarios. In that scenario, it is just better to play a tiebreaker out. But I understand why that's not the case. Likewise, it's all best of ones. Even if it's round robin, again, ignoring business considerations, let's have them be best of threes in round robin. That'd be pretty cool. Then also you can use number of maps won as a tiebreaker. That's a much better tiebreaker than rounds won. You know, these are factors that, again, I think, well, not maps won, because obviously everyone would win 2-0 when they win a series. I'm on about map differential. Like, every time you lose a map, that takes one off. When you win a map, that puts 1 or 2 on. You have that kind of a scenario. But again, with this format, I understand it's not going to happen. The problem is, at this tournament, you only get to see one best of 3. And if people know me, best of 3 is by far the one I prefer to watch. And I always say this, for me, best of 3 is real Counter-Strike. The other best of 1s, whatever, they're kind of just something you have to put up with, a necessary evil, because you can't have 4-week events for every event and have that many teams and have them all play best of 3s against everyone. Okay, I get it, sort of. But in this scenario, one of the reasons I don't like best of 1s, by the way, is when you ban out 2 or 3 maps each, that means that you're left with a scenario where no one's playing their best maps typically, because you ban each other's strengths out, and therefore you end up in the middle of the map pool, which sure, could lead to closer games, but I want to see the best teams in the world on their best maps, or at least their second best maps, and as a result, I like best of 3s a lot better. It's not even that it's just the final that's a best of 3. There's not even another match. It's not like there's a third place game. No, aside from that, it's only the finals of best of 3. So there's only really the final for me that's really meaningful Counter-Strike, that has like some historical value. And because it's the only best of 3, it makes the tournament not as prestigious, not as great. Then it's invite only, so teams can't qualify in theory. It's also not as prestigious, not as big a deal. It's not a huge international event. It only has 6 teams, doesn't have 12 or 16 or 24 or whatever. The format's fairly weak. It's just round robin best of 1s. You don't have overtime. You don't have tiebreakers played out. There's a lot of flaws with this overall approach. Then we talk about the show match angle. Okay, listen, it's some fun for the fans. I get that. It's even good if you know about stage logistics, where you want to have a match that you can kind of have a sense of how long it'll last, to warm the crowd up, have the stage set up, but you don't want it to be a full best of 3 so that can push the other final forwards by too many hours, or make it start earlier than possible. But in terms of competitive integrity, or rather having like a really high level tournament, these show match games mean fuck all. Like, they don't even, for me, decide who's the best with an eagle or an AWP. Like, the amount of times I've seen the worst player win in that scenario, it's ridiculous. They mean fuck all, right? They're just fun for the fans. So if you look at the business concerns, a lot of this makes a lot more sense. Like, the format for Blast Pro Series, this is why it initially was such a big deal that day 1 in Copenhagen, when I did that first event, went so badly, is because they had all these people there on day 1 who were businessmen from around the world, who were there to potentially pitch, like, okay, I want it in my city, in this country, or I want to bring it to this location, this region would be great with it. And luckily, because we did such a great fill on the desk, they never noticed that the event was supposed to have happened and didn't happen. They thought that was just like a pre-game show and the games were the next day. So the concept was, it's a 1.5 day event. It's not even a full day on the Friday. It's always Friday leading into Saturday, so you can have people come off work, watch the first few games, then come on Saturday for the whole day. It's as a result, you have a crowd only for the second day, so you only have 1 day in the venue where you have to get everything perfect. Very compact schedule, so it can fit in such a small space of time. Remember, even old school tournaments used to be at least 2 full days, if not 3 full days, and that's playing from 9 a.m. to potentially 10 p.m. at night. So you want one big final matchup to really have all the marbles, all the bells and whistles. The rest of it you want to be unique and have this gimmick where you're going to have all the best of ones, and you're going to have the simultaneous matchups, and you're going to invite all the big fan favourites and the top teams around the world. But as a result, all those factors mean that it'll never be a top international competition, because it doesn't use the formats that are the best, which are currently used. It doesn't have open qualification for it, because that goes against the concept. It doesn't have more days, so you can fit a better format in, better matches overall. It doesn't have more best of 3s, because it wouldn't fit within that time frame. There's all these downsides. Now, Blast can exist as a cool side tournament. That's what it is for me. For me, I consider it a side tournament to the rest of the circuit. I sort of count it like it's at least more important than like DreamHack Open Summer or something. But all the same, the results from DreamHack Open in terms of how sturdy the format is are much, much better, and a lot easier to gauge in terms of what they mean. There's only really the final, like I said, that really means that much to me overall. So I do think there are some flaws with it conceptually. I don't think it's cool. It's just, if they really ever want it to be among the biggest circuits in the world, this ain't going to cut it at the moment, what they're currently doing. This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, James Harding, NateDOhDoubleG, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, Travis Greb, Tristan Jones, Daniel Olivar, Jiangheng Lu, and special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion, one of my OGs. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question. I have a monthly AMA. Perhaps you want teasers for who the next guests are on my upcoming talk shows. Maybe you want to be part of my monthly discussion where my top patrons talk to me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the description box link for Patreon.